Today we're talking about nervous system burnout and 4 herbs to help. And the herbal class of medicines that we're talking about right now are called nervines. And these are herbs that help support a dysregulated or imbalanced nervous system. We're going to get a little bit more kind of in detail on the different herbs that I'll use. But just remember, there is just this never-ending list of herbal nervines. Every herbalist has their favorite herbs, their herbal allies, and I'll share the top 4 that I turn to time and time again for this nervous system burnout picture. And so if I'm thinking about the classic kind of avatar of a nervous system burned out patient, they would be agitated, restless, they'd be very anxious, there tends to be a little bit of an edge to them, whether they're anxious about their health, whether they're anxious about their family or their work or whatever stress they have in their life. And a huge pearl here is they tend to have a lot of sleep disturbances, whether they can't get to sleep, whether they can't stay asleep, or whether they're sleeping for a good chunk, 8, 9, 10 hours, and they're waking up feeling unrefreshed. Now, initially, I didn't put a whole lot of stock into kind of the nervous system picture. We pay a lot of lip service to it, and we want to rebalance it and get something out of the sympathetic dominant nervous system and blah, blah, blah. But when you kind of dive into the science, you can see that a stressor on the body, and that could be anything from sitting in peak hour to being dehydrated, to a microbiome imbalance like SIBO or a candida overgrowth, whatever is adding stress to the system. It could even be perceived stress. It might not be any kind of actual stress in your life. Whatever is putting that stress on the body is starting that domino effect, which we're going to be talking about now. It's important, I think, just to understand the basics of the pathophysiology. And then when you work with a herbalist and you work with some of these nervine herbs, you can kind of really lean into how they're working on the system and helping you regulate that nervous system burnout that you're experiencing. So it's pretty complex, right? We're talking about the nervous system. We're talking about this web, this interface where the brain's talking to the rest of the body and the body's talking to the brain, and this kind of never-ending loop of information. It's an information highway, right? From nerve fibers and nerve impulses and neurotransmitters, really this call and response. And again, when you are perceiving stress for whatever reason, and the list just never ends, right? Particularly in this modern world, you are setting up that domino response that kicks on down the line. And here, the really big system to be focusing on is the SAM axis. And this was new to me, but I found this really, really insightful. We're talking about the sympathetic adreno-medullary axis. That's responsible for increased heart rate, blood pressure. You're getting a release of those excitatory neurotransmitters. We got epinephrine and norepinephrine, and this process happens in seconds, right? That is the beauty, the kind of the pro and the con, or the curse and the benefit of the nervous system, right? It just happens immediately, happens in seconds. So the really big piece, and this is where I get excited, because this is where I can intervene with the patients that I work with to catch it early and to catch it before it devolves into the consequence, which is adrenal fatigue. And don't worry, we're going to get there in a second. There is a lag time between this nervous system activation and the sympathetic dominant, the fight or flight, that noradrenaline and adrenaline, or epinephrine and norepinephrine, same thing, getting activated due to that stress response. There's a lag time between that whole system kicking in to the production of cortisol through the HPA axis. And I know this is getting so complicated and overwhelming, bear with me. The HPA axis is basically your brain talking to your adrenals to produce cortisol from a stress response, right? And so it's that next stage, and there's a lag between the nervous system and the adrenal system kind of getting kicked in, where we can intervene and head it off at the pass, prevent what they're calling in the past adrenal fatigue or adrenal burnout and the different stages. And now we're starting to talk about it. I mean, I don't mind those labels at all. I think they're actually pretty appropriate and describe what's going on. But we're starting to talk about that a lot more, like HPA axis dysfunction, hypothalamic-pituitary-adrenal axis dysfunction. Something's gone wrong, and that something is all the way back to the nervous system. So there are 4 symptoms of classic HPA activation, and I want you to take a second and just think, reflect. Is this you? Is this someone you know? Is it a family member? Is it a friend? Is it a work colleague? A lot of us can be running these without even knowing. And the 4 classic symptoms, number 1 would be an inability to cope, particularly with stress. I mean, if your stress tolerance is slim to none, there's a chance that HPA activation is part of your picture or someone that you know. Number 2 would be a feeling of helplessness. Number 3 would be affective distress. So if you are more distressed than the people around you in the same circumstance or the same situation, there's again a chance that HPA activation is part of the picture. And then number 4 is perceived uncontrollability. So if you don't have the ability to kind of regulate and maintain, if you're feeling like you're out of control, again, that's a classic sign of HPA activation. So we're going to talk about the herbs now. I know I've kept you waiting. I probably bored you with some of that pathophysiology, but I thought it was really important. The more we understand about what's happening in our body, the more we can kind of get on board, the more we can lean into these herbal therapeutics. And so let's talk about them now. Remember, these are my herbal allies. There's a never-ending list of herbal nervines. These are just ones that I use frequently, daily in the dispensary, prescribing them all the time for different reasons. We'll talk about that when we get into it. And also remember, they're not recommendations for you. Definitely work with a skilled herbalist when you're bringing in some of these herbs. They can be very strong. So the 4 herbs, let's just list them and then we'll talk about why. Number 1 would be passion flower. Number 2 would be Kava. Number 3 would be chamomile. And number 4 would be motherwort. We'll talk about the differences between them now. So passion flower, it's been with us for a long, long time. We've got some anthropological evidence showing that passion flower has been with us, and we've been using it for over 4,000 years, which is almost, hard to wrap your head around. And it's been used across the globe. This is really something that I start to pay attention to. If a herb grows in a certain area and different cultures turn to it again and again and again, it's not something that I ignore. It has a history of use for anxiety, depression, ADHD, insomnia, neuralgia, so that's nerve pain, palpitations, hypertension, and more. And so most of those things there, particularly the anxiety, the depression, the ADHD, the insomnia, the palpitations, even the hypertension, those can all be symptoms of a stress response, the nervous system kicking in, and then downstream the adrenal system kicking in as well. So if we're looking at the phytochemistry of passion flower, there's a few different classes. I mean, there's a bunch in passion flower, but the ones that really jump out are the alkaloids. And these alkaloids can be MAO inhibitors, meaning that it slows down that enzyme that helps break down a bunch of neurotransmitters. That's a really big one. They're only there in very small amounts. So, we're unclear whether that's why passion flower is such a potent nervine. It's a potent sedative, and it really kind of calms down that overly anxious, overly agitated patient. Really helps with sleep. I really, really like passion flower for sleep personally and for a bunch of my patients as well. And there's a lot of focus on the flavonoids in passion flower. Can make all the way up to 2.5% of the plant, which is a whopping amount of flavonoids. And so there's an interesting little piece here with the flavonoids, and we're just teasing this out. It's kind of on the cutting edge of science, and watch this space, but it looks like the flavonoids need to be metabolized by our gut bugs, by our microbiome, to actually have that knock-on anti-anxiety action on the body. So let me run that by you again. Flavonoids in passion flower need to be kind of consumed or metabolized by our gut bugs before it's effective as a nervine. Still teasing that out, but that's exciting data showing this kind of synergy between our microbiome and herbal medicine and the nervous system. So how is passion flower working? Now, again, we're still teasing this one out. It's not uncommon for herbs to be unclear on exactly what they're doing in the body physiologically, but we're really focusing in on GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, as the main mechanism for passion flower. It's the inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain, one of the kind of prime ones, and I like to kind of describe GABA to patients like the brakes to the nervous system. You get the stress response, you get excitatory neurotransmitters flooding the synapses and kind of controlling the show. That's the accelerator, right? Run from the tiger. If you're just dealing with, traffic or, a stressful job, burning the candle at both ends, we really want to kind of, exercise that brake, and that's GABA. So clinically, where would I recommend passion flower? I recommend passion flower for the anxious mind. And these are patients that come to the clinic. They tell me they have a lot of trouble getting to sleep, staying asleep. They got a million things on their mind that's kind of keeping them up and keeping them anxious. They tend to be that person in the family or even in the job that everyone turns to and kind of loads them up with work or responsibility. They tend to say yes to everything. They have a real trouble saying no to things, and they tend to be A-type personalities. So overworked, overstressed, a million things on the mind, can't get to sleep, can't stay asleep, and just burning the candle at both ends. So the second big herbal nervine that I recommend all the time is a very, very potent sedative hypnotic called Kava, Piper methysticum. This herb is synonymous with the South Pacific and is consumed traditionally in many, if not all, of the Polynesian islands. It's a really common kind of cultural herb. I remember when I was traveling through Fiji when I was about 18, 19 years old. I mean, Kava is just everywhere, and the Fijians are drinking Kava daily, and that was definitely my experience when I was there. So if you look Kava up online, it is thought to cause liver damage, and I think we definitely need to be careful around patients or people who have issues with their liver, but I am not overly concerned with noble cultivars of Kava that have been extracted into water. And this is a whole video for another time. I did a really deep dive on Kava early in the day because I got such good results with it, but I was concerned about the toxicity of Kava, and there is a really fascinating kind of history of Kava where Westerners got obsessed with it and we started importing it, and we didn't know what the right Kava was to import. We started importing kind of non-medicinal Kavas, these noble cultivars, which they've been cultivating forever. And the other really big piece here is that we started extracting them into alcohol, which appears to be a bit of a no-no, right? I'm so much more comfortable with the water extracts of Kava compared to alcoholic extracts. I would actually stay away from alcoholic extracts of Kava completely. Now, as I mentioned, Kava, I look at it as a very potent sedative hypnotic, and again, that's the dose you're taking. Some patients are taking decent doses of Kava when they need to go to sleep and they can't sleep and they need to calm down and they're quite anxious. So if we're talking about the constituents of Kava, we're focusing in on Kava lactones, and this again is a story for another day. I'll do a deep dive on it for you guys, you people who are interested. But if we're looking at the noble cultivars of Kava, the safe varieties of Kava, they have a really healthy spread, a safe spread of these Kava lactones, whereas these wild types, and there's even 7-day Kava that, the effects can last for up to 7 days, they have an unhealthy spread of cavalactones, and that's where I would be concerned around liver damage for susceptible people. The noble cultivars, very controlled. Here in Australia, that's the only Kava that we are allowed to import. It's very closely regulated, so I am very comfortable with Australian sourced Kava that has been extracted into water, and again, that's very closely regulated as well. So Kava, what's it do? It's an anxiolytic. It can calm that anxiety. It can ground patients. It's quite sweet. It's got this kind of numbing effect on the mouth when you take it. Some texts would call it a mild sedative. I would consider it quite a potent, quite a strong sedative. I would put it right up there with valerian. In fact, I don't even really use valerian. I use Kava instead of valerian when I'm looking to actually just knock a patient out. They can't sleep, they're insomniac, they need, 4 hours is just a blessing. Kava is top of the pile right there. I'll combine that with passion flower for that added benefit, and then even a couple more sedative nervines as well for that added kind of synergy. Kava is also a skeletal muscle relaxant as well. So a lot of patients are dealing with lower back pain and that muscle kind of stiffness and the tension. Kava can be really big, and it's also a mild analgesic, so a little bit of a painkiller there as well. So if we're looking at the scientific studies of Kava, we can see that there are great studies showing that Kava can reduce anxiety. I wouldn't normally clinically be using Kava daily for anxiety. I find it's a little bit too sedating for most patients at the right dose, at the dose that will get that result. But what I would be using Kava for clinically is a patient that is having trouble getting to sleep and staying asleep because of that nervous system burnout that we talked about. And so here I would be combining Kava with other sleep support herbs. Things like passion flower would be great. There's a couple others. And we would be taking that before bed, initially at a decent dose, right? Like we want effects, we want patients sleeping. And so initially at a decent dose, get them sleeping. And then over time, it's a little bit like a muscle reflex. You can get in this sync, this circadian rhythm. You're reestablishing the circadian rhythm. And then I find that patients need less and less. And personally, I've even been through this myself where at times I have trouble getting to sleep. And I think back, okay, what's stressing me out? What in my life is not balanced, right? Like where is that domino kind of triggering into this whole kind of process that we talked about? I'll get on my sleep mix support and I will reestablish that circadian rhythm. I'll make sure that I'm getting good sunlight exposure in the morning, and then I'll find I need less and less of those herbs. And then they just live in my cupboard for, if I'm working late at night for some reason. The third herb for nervous system burnout is chamomile. And I find chamomile is very underappreciated by most people. You can find it locally at most grocery stores and at health food shops. And, again, people don't really appreciate its potency, and that's because most people are underdosing on chamomile. The standout flavor of chamomile is bitter. You might have tried chamomile before and say, oh, look, I didn't really taste much bitterness. You weren't taking enough. That bitterness has this very gentle but very potent, very effective impact on the digestive tract. And this is where this beautiful nervine, this herb that can help the nervous system and restlessness and agitation and kind of poor stress tolerance can interface with the digestive tract as well. So if we're looking at the chemistry of chamomile, we've got a bunch of flavonoids in this herb. We've got quercetin, we've got luteolin, we've got apigenin. You wouldn't really think about chamomile as an allergy herb, but all of those flavonoids are very potent potent, some of the most potent mast cell stabilizers in our natural dispensary. Now, these flavonoids are also potently anti-inflammatory, and they're also spasmolytic as well, which is really that interface between the nervous system and the digestive tract. So if you find that you are agitated or nervous or stressed, you've got that anxiety, and that is kicking over to digestive symptoms, bloating, flatulence, abdominal pain, butterflies in your stomach, chamomile can be a really, really big piece here that can interface with both of those different body systems and improve them, stabilizing the nervous system and supporting it with that calming kind of effect, and then supporting the digestive tract with that bitterness, that spasmolytic and carminative, helping the body deal with excess gas, that flatulence or maybe burping. So clinically, you've guessed it, I would be recommending chamomile to patients who are dealing with digestive issues, bloating, gas, butterflies in their tummy, that kind of nervous dyspepsia picture. When they see those symptoms flare or worsen, they're exacerbated when they're under stress, when they're anxious, when they're agitated. If there's a clear link between the nervous system and the digestive tract, that's where chamomile can really do some heavy lifting. Now, the last herb, Motherwort, this might be one that you've heard of, maybe not. It's definitely not as popular as chamomile or Kava or passion flower, but is one of my strong herbal allies. I have a bunch of herbs that I turn to time and time again. The definition of herbal ally to me is a herb that I can rely on, that I understand and know and can depend on in situations, whether I'm treating myself, whether I'm treating my family or my friends, or whether I'm treating my patients in the Byron Herbalist Clinic. So Motherwort, it's in the mint family, the Lamiaceae family, and it is one of a number of bitter mints. And when you think about mint, you might not think of bitter herbs. We have a bunch of bitter mints in herbal medicine. For me, Motherwort is really top of the pile there. It's very cooling, it's a little bit drying, and it's quite bitter. And it really, kind of similar to chamomile, has that similar action on the digestive tract. It can upregulate a lot of your digestive functions and kind of get things like enzymes and stomach acid and even kind of motility happening through the digestive tract, along with being a very potent nervine, settling down and calming that nervous system. So the chemistry of Motherwort, we've got a whole long list of kind of active constituents. And again, we're thinking the active constituent is the whole herb, so don't get too bogged down here. But we've got alkaloids in Motherwort. We've also got flavonoids in Motherwort, and the really standout one here is we have a bunch of terpene-like structures, almost like essential oils in Motherwort as well. And this is a very unique kind of combination of constituents that really gives Motherwort, again, a very unique position in the dispensary. Motherwort has an affinity for the heart, whether that's palpitations, whether that's arrhythmias, whether you can just kind of feel your heart kind of pounding out of its chest for whatever reason, whether your stress hits you in the heart, right? If we're kind of rewinding back to passion flower, where that's more that kind of like mental anxiety and that mental restlessness, a million things on the mind. If you're stressed, if you get that stress response and that whole kind of sequence of events, those whole dominoes that results in kind of adrenal burnout at the very end, if your stress hits you in your heart, Motherwort is really a standout herbal medicine for you here. Also, that bitter principle, similar to chamomile, Motherwort does interface with the digestive tract. It's a spasmolytic, so it can help with digestive spasms. I've seen it really help with that low stomach acid, things like red meat just sitting in the stomach and not moving and not digesting. That can be big. Bitter, this is a gentle bitter. It's not a strong bitter like gentian, but like a mild bitter It can also help with motility through the digestive tract as well. So we've got those 4 nervous system burnout herbs that I use all the time. We've got passion flower, we've got Kava, we've got chamomile, and we've got Motherwort. Remember, there's a whole long list of other ones that you can turn to. And if you are dealing with adrenal fatigue or adrenal burnout, I would recommend backing it all the way upstream to that nervous system and that stress response and that sympathetic dominant tilt. You might still, if you're deep in adrenal fatigue, you might still need to have to treat the adrenals, but if you are not getting the results that you need from an adrenal support program, the nervous system might be where you are missing the piece. Remember to like and comment, subscribe below if it was helpful, and if you're in Australia or New Zealand and you are dealing with some of these issues, then consider reaching out to the clinic. There will be a link in the description below.